Annabelle, 31, had spent most of her adult life trying to remain a quiet presence within her own family. Living alone in Austin and working as an editor for a small publishing house, she had grown accustomed to watching her relatives from a distance, like a child pressing her face to a window on a rainy day. The family group chat, an ever-churning stream of birthday wishes, baby photos, passive-aggressive jokes, and reaction memes, had always been a symbol of inclusion, for everyone but her. Whenever she contributed, her messages were met with silence, broken only by the occasional emoji or generic thumbs up from a distant cousin. She had learned to expect nothing, and that expectation had hardened into numbness. Her name would be tagged only when someone needed a book recommendation, or when her absence from an event needed to be noted with polite confusion. She had once tried to share a photo from her recent work trip to Portland, where one of her edited titles had won a small literary award. No response. Minutes later, the chat burst into excited chatter about someone's gender reveal party. Annabelle scrolled through it with dead eyes, her finger moving like a pendulum across the screen. She was never overtly excluded, never insulted outright, but the silence surrounding her words spoke volumes. It was the kind of rejection that couldn't be quoted, only felt. The emotional erosion wasn't sudden. It came in layers, like sediment settling at the bottom of a forgotten river. Her mother's overly cheerful messages about family dinners she was never told about. Her brother's sarcastic remarks that passed as jokes but always carried a barb. The way her aunt once asked if she was still doing that editing thing, as if it were a phase rather than a career. These things stacked quietly, year after year, until Annabelle felt like a ghost walking through a house that used to be hers. One rainy afternoon, while searching for a past message about her grandmother's upcoming birthday, she tapped into a long-forgotten folder within the app. It was labeled Chat Export Old Threads, an archive she didn't remember creating but clearly hadn't been removed from. As the messages loaded, her eyes narrowed. These weren't the usual family banter. These were side conversations, unfiltered, brutal, careless. Her name appeared again and again, attached to words she could barely process. Her cousin had written that she was still clinging to that lonely editor job like it was a lifeline. Her brother had called her emotionally manipulative, always playing the victim. Her own mother had joked that she was probably too proud to ask for help, even though she clearly needed it. Worse still were the messages that danced on the edge of cruelty with a smile. Screenshots of her social media posts with snide comments, speculation about why she never married, mockery of the dresses she wore to family weddings. They had spoken about her like she was furniture in a house they'd outgrown. Old in the way, disposable. Her aunt had once written that keeping Annabelle in the chat was like keeping an old plant alive out of guilt. Annabelle read every word. Not once, not twice. She read them until the phrases blurred, until her coffee went cold, until she could no longer tell if the ache in her stomach came from the betrayal or the familiarity, because deep down she had always known. The chat only confirmed what years of awkward silences and half-hearted hugs had been screaming. She had never truly belonged. Outside her window, the rain tapped gently on the glass. The house was quiet. Her phone, still glowing in her hand, buzzed softly with another meme from the family group chat. She didn't open it. She just stared at it, as if waiting for something else to break. Annabelle's fingers moved without thought at first, tapping the buttons to capture screen after screen. The motion became mechanical, soothing in its rhythm, like collecting evidence she didn't yet know how to use. The folder on her desktop filled with numbered images, 01, 02, 03. It felt distant, like watching someone else perform the task. She didn't pause to think why she was doing it. It was instinct, a need to preserve what she couldn't yet name. But when she stumbled upon one particular exchange, her breath caught in her throat. It was a short thread, buried between jokes about someone's casserole and a forwarded meme. Her brother Tom had written to their aunt, "Let her stay broke. At least then, she won't get to play the victim card again." The message was followed by her mother's reply, casual and cruel. "She's always known how to milk pity when she needs to. That's her real talent." These weren't careless comments. They were precise, intimate, designed to wound, but shared as if she were a character on a show they all watched and judged. Not a person, not family, just something disposable. The pain that followed wasn't sharp. It was dull and suffocating, like salt pressed into a bruise already yellowed. She stared at the screen, rereading the words over and over, waiting for the numbness to return. But it didn't. This was different. This was too far. It wasn't just that they didn't like her. It was that they'd built a private consensus around her worthlessness. They had turned her into a figure of mockery, a warning, a shadow, and they had done it together, with laughter, with casual cruelty, with a sense of shared superiority. The days that followed blurred into restless nights and silent mornings. Sleep became impossible. Her mind played back their words on a loop, each phrase a rusty nail in the foundation of her identity. She started cataloging the messages, not just saving them, but labeling them, arranging them into folders. Mockery, invisibility, financial ridicule. She gave each file a name and a timestamp, as if preparing a report for a tribunal that would never come. She tried to go about her life as if everything were the same, but the world had tilted. Coffee tasted flat. The city's noise felt louder. Faces on the street seemed more indifferent. Her sense of safety, already fragile, had cracked. She no longer knew who in her family she could trust, or if any of them ever truly saw her beyond the mask they had painted. There were moments when she questioned herself. Maybe she was reading too much into it. Maybe she was being too sensitive. But then she'd reread Tom's message, or her mother's, and the doubt would vanish. These weren't misunderstandings. They were convictions. They had decided who she was and discussed it like gossip at a salon. And slowly, beneath the sorrow, something else began to stir. A quiet, coiled fury. Not the kind that flared up and burned out. This was slower, deeper. It simmered in her bones. They had taken her silence for weakness. They had made her absence easy. But they had also made a mistake. They documented their disdain in their own words. What began as passive documentation turned into quiet strategy. Each screenshot wasn't just proof, it was a reckoning waiting to happen. Annabelle didn't yet know what she would do. But she knew this: she wouldn't carry their secrets for them anymore. Annabelle sat at her desk long after the sun had vanished behind the distant rooftops. The soft hum of her old desk lamp was the only sound in the room. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, hesitant at first, then slowly began to type. Not words, not explanations, just actions. She opened a blank email draft and stared at the empty white box, wide and unassuming, like a snow-covered field before a storm. There would be no salutation, no apology, no justification. Only the truth, delivered cold and intact. She began attaching the files one by one, screenshots labeled and time-stamped, archived voice messages filled with laughter at her expense, threads of hidden group chats where she had been mocked, belittled, and dismissed. Some messages were old, almost faded in memory, but they stung with fresh venom when read again. Others were recent, written in the careless tone of people certain they'd never be heard. Annabelle inserted everything, every emoji-laced insult, every knife disguised as a joke, every private observation about her body, her job, her loneliness. The message grew heavier with each attachment, not just in file size, but in emotional weight. Still, she didn't flinch. Her hands trembled, but she moved steadily, methodically. She wasn't writing to explain. She was compiling to reveal. There would be no narration, no preamble, no emotional framing, just a wall of truth, unsoftened and raw, lined up like glass under a bare foot. When everything was assembled, she created a new email account. The address was generic, the name nondescript, no identifiers, no traceable signals. This wasn't about confrontation. It was about release, about refusing to protect the people who had so long enjoyed the comfort of her silence. The recipient list was copied straight from the family thread. Parents, siblings, cousins, spouses, even the distant relatives who only posted baby photos and holiday recipes, especially them, because some of them had laughed, some had watched silently, and some had never known the conversations they'd been excluded from. She double-checked every line, no added message, no subject line other than a date, no hints about who had sent it, just attachments, page after page of casual betrayal laid bare. For a moment, she hovered over the send button. A flicker of hesitation rose, not from fear of consequence, but from the gravity of what came next. This was not a message. This was a match. And everything it touched would burn. At exactly 7:13 a.m. on Monday morning, with the streets still quiet and inboxes just beginning to stir, the message was delivered. No sound, no alert, just a silent intrusion, waiting like a pressure bomb to be opened. Annabelle closed the laptop and stood in the silence of her apartment. The air felt still, the light gray. She didn't know what would happen next. She didn't want to. All she knew was that the weight was no longer hers to carry. The first few hours after the email was delivered passed in eerie silence. Annabelle watched the family group chat, like someone waiting for thunder after lightning. Nothing came, no notifications, no reactions. It was as if her truth had disappeared into a void. But beneath that silence, something was cracking. Slow, invisible, inevitable. By mid-morning, the fissures began to split open. The first message appeared from her cousin Lauren, short, accusatory, directed not at Annabelle, but at their Aunt Melissa. It was a question cloaked in fury, and it landed like a spark in a dry field. Melissa responded defensively, blaming their mother for setting the tone of the group chats. The mother fired back, calling Lauren impulsive and misinformed. The chain reaction was immediate. Threads unraveled. Private alliances collapsed in public view. The group chat exploded with activity. Messages piled up at a dizzying speed, some apologetic, some defensive, many purely venomous. Screenshots were reposted, dissected, denied. Context was demanded and dismissed. Long-buried grudges surfaced, tethered to the tone of a sentence or the punctuation in an old message. One person accused another of always being two-faced. Someone else replied with a voice memo full of tears and shouting. Every attempt at calm was drowned out by the noise of collapse. Annabelle's name was mentioned again and again, not tagged, but referenced. She was called the source, the hacker, the saboteur. One cousin posted a dramatic message about betrayal and digital privacy. Her brother Tom deleted his account entirely after someone reposted his harshest words. Soon others followed. Profile pictures vanished. Names changed. An aunt who rarely said anything removed herself from the group with no explanation. Family branches began quietly amputating one another. The older generation tried to reclaim control. They called for respect and healing. They invoked traditions, holidays, shared blood. But their voices were brittle and scattered. The younger ones pushed back harder. Some thanked the anonymous sender. Some demanded full transparency. A niece, only 19, wrote a post about generational hypocrisy that earned dozens of likes and a bitter reply from her own mother. Beneath it all, Annabelle remained silent. She didn't respond. She didn't log in. She watched the ruins form from a distance, detached but unblinking. This wasn't revenge, it was exposure. She had simply handed them a mirror, and now they couldn't bear to look into it. No one asked if the screenshots were fake. They knew. The outrage came not from fabrication, but from the fact that the curtain had been pulled back and the rot was now public. Her grandmother, kind and bewildered, sent a few confused messages. She asked what had happened, why people were fighting. No one answered her directly. She was collateral to a storm that had always been coming. Annabelle knew they would tell themselves stories, that she had invaded their privacy, that she had betrayed the family, that she had gone too far. But deep down, Each of them also knew something else. They had written their truths in their own words. She had only pressed send. A full week passed in the smoldering quiet that follows disaster. The group chat, once a constant stream of noise and emojis, had turned into a graveyard of unsent messages and unread reactions. Then, late one evening, a message appeared. An invitation to a family video call. The subject line was neutral, almost sterile. Time to talk. It came from her uncle's address, but the intention was collective. They wanted to contain the damage, salvage dignity, rebuild some illusion of unity. Annabelle didn't reply. She didn't decline either. She simply watched as names trickled in and then vanished. The call started, but fewer than a dozen people joined. Cameras off, microphones muted, faces missing. People who once vied to speak the loudest now hovered in silence or didn't show up at all. Her Aunt Melissa exited the chat permanently the next morning, her profile erased without farewell. Her brother Tom didn't join the call either. Instead, a new notification popped up a few hours later. A new group had been created. Smaller, carefully curated. Her name was not among the members. The pattern was clear. They weren't coming together to reckon with truth. They were fragmenting into smaller, safer enclaves where blame could be redirected and accountability postponed. No one wanted to stand in front of the mirror any longer than necessary. Annabelle's grandmother called her in tears. The old woman's voice cracked as she asked what was happening, why the family was breaking apart. Annabelle listened in silence, offering vague comforts she didn't believe. She could hear the confusion in her grandmother's breath, the tremble of someone too old for this kind of fire. Later that night, her mother finally sent a message. It was short, bitter. It read, "You destroyed everything. I hope it was worth it." There was no question mark, no warmth, just a sentence carved from ice. Annabelle read it once, then deleted it without response. The sting she once would have felt was gone. In its place remained only a hollow stillness, the kind that follows a storm when the trees no longer move. No one had apologized. Not one person had acknowledged what they'd written, what they'd laughed at, what they'd enabled. There were no admissions, no ownership of harm, only discomfort, only the frantic scrambling to reposition themselves, to reclaim moral ground before someone else could drag them down further. It wasn't guilt that haunted them. It was exposure. The group chat was never officially closed, but it died all the same. No new messages appeared. No updates, no birthday posts, no plans for Sunday dinners. The silence was not peaceful. It was scorched earth. Annabelle imagined it now as a digital ruin, a burned-out theater where every curtain had been ripped down, every whisper echoed too loudly. She didn't feel triumphant. She didn't feel vindicated. She felt emptied. What had once been a structure, flawed, strained, but familiar, was now only smoke and broken beams. There was nothing left to walk through, nothing left to mend, only ash. A month passed. The air grew cooler, and with it came a quiet that was no longer hostile, but unfamiliar in its gentleness. Annabelle sat on the edge of her bed one morning and scrolled through her phone, past folders labeled Family, past hidden chats and saved screenshots. One by one, she deleted them. Messages, images, voices that had once burned, now dissolved with a few taps. The silence in the room echoed back at her, no longer accusing, no longer heavy. It simply was. She cleared her call history. She left every group. Notifications disappeared, leaving her screen bare, her evenings undisturbed. For the first time in years, there were no passive-aggressive holiday reminders, no group-wide birthday pings, no threads that veiled resentment behind exclamation points and heart emojis. The absence felt sharp at first, like the sudden removal of background noise she hadn't realized was constant. But slowly, that sharpness softened. What remained was stillness. Her new apartment, smaller but filled with light, had no framed family photos on the walls. Instead, she had pinned up a printed quote above her desk. "If truth destroyed it, then it was built on lies too long." The paper was plain, the font unremarkable, but the words rooted themselves like a mantra. Every time she looked up, they reminded her that the collapse hadn't been her doing. It had only been her refusal to keep pretending. In the quiet, Annabelle began to notice things she had once ignored. The sound of her own breathing when she read late into the night. The way sunlight hit the corner of the kitchen counter in the early afternoon. She spent weekends wandering through bookstores, volunteering at the local community center, sitting in cafes without needing to check her phone every few minutes. Conversations with strangers became more sincere than years of forced exchanges with people who shared her last name. She started building something new, not a replacement for the family she had lost, but a different kind of connection. She reached out to people who listened, who didn't ask her to shrink to make space for their comfort. She reconnected with an old college friend who had once told her she deserved more than tolerance. They met for lunch. They talked without filters. It felt strange, and then it didn't. The silence that once carved holes into her chest now gave her room to stretch. It was no longer a punishment. It was permission, a space where no one expected her to perform or apologize for existing. Her world had grown smaller in some ways, but it had also become more honest, more breathable. The weight of belonging to something toxic had lifted. She belonged only to herself now. Annabelle no longer waited for messages that never came. She no longer wondered how she was being spoken about in her absence. The fear had dissolved. The ache had quieted. What remained was an open landscape, not empty, but waiting. And in that waiting, she finally found peace.